everybody. So my multicultural and social justice class has asked me to present on issues in the classroom and how to overcome it. So obviously we know that our school is not as maybe diverse socioeconomically and culturally as you would find in a public school. But Lauren Marlis, our lovely registrar or registration person, has said that 40% of our students are actually of a non-Caucasian culture. She is counting mixed race children, and that is growing. In second grade, 58% are either mixed or non-Caucasian, and 62% in kindergarten. So it's actually growing each year. And somebody told me earlier that 10% of, we are in the top 10% of schools in California for being private schools, for being diverse. So even though we may think, oh, this doesn't apply to us, it actually applies to us much more than we might think. So, and these are our lovely children. Here is my important textbook that I have received a lot of this information, and I have picked apart a lot from what I read and condensed it to something that is valuable to you guys, but there's my source. Okay, so according to this book, there are 4 issues limiting social justice in the classroom. And these are 4 that really apply to us, I think. Standardized testing, tracking, curriculum, pedagogy, that's our nice grad school word for classroom instruction. So, let's first start with standardized testing. So please, on your technology, you can go to Schoology, and I posted a link. And I'd like you to do the open-ended survey. Your name is not attached.
Just at home?
Yeah, so you go, I posted on MJS Lounge, so, that I don't have right now.
Just go home.
Here's the question. And should be available. You can do it on your phone. Try not, the texting didn't work. So it would work better if you respond. If you don't have it, it's fine. Hopefully. Did anybody press submit? No. Okay.
We're going to poll everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Fun. I've never done it myself, I always make kids do it.
Right? See, isn't that a good experience?
It's like, oh, this is just cool.
I found out the text feature is having issues today, so that's why we're using the website version.
Is this another one? I think so. Right? I can see.
Because I
Yeah.
don't have it on my calendar, so.
Yeah,
I can do it.
Just, yeah, sure, go for it. Thank you, Ms. Hopton.
Nicole Sander.
Am I supposed to have that on my window?
Mm-hmm.
I don't. What is it for you? Let me start talking.
Okay, so this seems to be, this one, grouping of students by levels, is usually the number one reason I would say that independent schools, we test each year is to look and say, where should we put our students to support math placement. But a lot of us never really see it. So if we go back, our most common reasons: grouping or tracking students, preparing students for future standardized tests, which is an important skill, and in public school, determining retention, and the scary one, measuring school and teacher performance. And we can all, yay, celebrate that we don't have to be in that. That we are lucky enough to be in a place where we don't thrive based on how our kids do on a standardized test. So now, originally, the standardized tests were used to determine mentally disabled. I don't like saying that word. But, so that was originally what standardized tests were created for over a century ago. And then to transition into proof of racist theories. And the author of the book goes into examples. After testing 2 American Indian and Mexican American children, a psychologist at the beginning of the 20th century said, "Their dullness seems to be racial, or at least inherent to the family stock from which they come. Children of this group should be segregated in special classes. They cannot master abstractions, but they can often be made efficient workers." That's really sad, and this has been used as excuses. So these are the original intentions of the standardized test, which is really scary, I think, the implications. We all know the SATs, right? And we'd like to think the standardized tests don't affect us really that much, but in a sense they do, because our high schools are still with their traditional stuff because they are preparing their kids for things like the SATs. And so we feel we must teach important things that make them successful in high school so that they can pass the SATs. Interestingly, students whose families make more than $200,000 scored 400 points higher than students whose families made $20,000 or less. So obviously that's a really big gap. But when you're arguing equitable education, there's obviously an achievement gap. So the sphere of testing does exist even in our school without realizing it. There is a connection. Okay, so what I think is the standardized testing takeaway is that we probably could do a lot more effective things with our standardized testing, like using it as one reference for what holes in our curriculum do we have. So, rather than maybe just using it to track, instead we could use it as, okay, our kids aren't understanding this important concept, we really need to work on this. And perhaps we do that, but I don't know, we don't really do that on a teacher level. So, something interesting. And obviously, we know not the only way to assess our kids. Okay, so moving on. Tracking. So tracking, that's the grad school word for making leveled groups, right? And which is what leads us perfectly into standardized testing. He argues that it is horrible, whether or not there are benefits, and we'll go over those. But why don't we just spend a minute talking in our groups about what benefits we see from our leveled groups that we have. So if you could talk among your group, and then
You can kind of.
Well, I'm not sure because I don't have level groups, but I would assume the perceived benefit is that you're teaching to
Or mix them
a
up.
certain level instead of having a differentiated classroom.
Focus on a particular skill.
So it doesn't matter what level, you don't have to differentiate. Because
Right.
there will always be someone at the top of the heap and someone at the bottom of the top. But the reality is,
Certainly,
the only
well,
difference with
I don't know about middle school, but in middle school, really the only teaching group based on abilities for math. So, and I eventually just in these conversations with math teachers about the pros and cons of that. Because even when you have, the only way the mixed class works is if you still have diverse material. As a, and so the grouping works great when you teach the whole class the same thing, because you've got students in the same group. But if you're gonna have a mixed group of kids, you have to realize that you're.
So it makes sense, right. I've seen, I've read change.
Make the students.
Within the class.
Right, I know the math one is someone needs to, they're all taught the same time, so there's less long.
Get mixed up.
Better and facilitates it more content for the high end. But they have also learned their downsides. So we've established that like in sixth grade. So we have advanced, some have advanced. Especially in sixth grade, but in sixth grade, we have mixed rule based, so the kids try not to track just.
So just to bring it back, I love our great conversations, just walking around, I've heard some really good things.
Sort of goes for one.
Sort of crazy, really low.
So is there anyone, if we could bring this back, is there anyone that would like to share something that maybe they talked about in their group? Or something, interesting issue,
I
or?
think what we're talking about, the children who, I guess, are excelling, or, the higher group, if you will, that that's sometimes a challenge for us to always meet their needs. And then we're just talking about how sometimes it's more the need of a parent, and always saying how the children are bored and how they want more, but not necessarily that it's the children that want more.
Right.
So it's kind of like that sticky wicky where you're not, where does it stem from, and do they really need more when they're already getting the idea, concepts or.
Right,
or
and
not.
what's interesting, I'm glad you mentioned that because, show you the next slide, tracking, oh wait, one more. Tracking really only, the research has shown that it really only helps the high kids. That it's not helping the low kids need the high kids to work with. And so, yeah, exactly. And one of the reasons that we can't detract, which I would not assume, but one of the reasons is that emphasis from the parents, right? That the parents of the high kids don't want to stop the detracting. And that's true in all schools, not just Mayfield. I can read it from my paper. That this exists everywhere. We've all experienced this, kids fighting, or parents fighting to get their kids in the highest math class, even when they're not really, placed to be in the high math class. The research has shown that tracking actually, the kids internalize it much more than we'd like to think. And they consider, when we're talking about the academic mindsets and the ability to grow, and by working hard, you can improve your intelligence, this is kind of going against that for those kids. Best teachers, statistically, tend to be given to the high kids. And so, and that's not where they need to be placed. I was just in one of my other grad school classes, we've been learning about the PISA, which is a test that it's a world.
That's an international test?
Yes, an international test. And Korea has been named the #1 school on that test. And one of the things that they do is they move all the really great principals and the really great teachers to the really struggling schools. So, and that's been one of the biggest ways that they have adapted and improved. So really interesting. And as teachers of the low classes, they're like, well, we can't do all the project-based learning, we can't do the fun activities, the flair stuff, because they have to learn the basics. And so they don't really ever get to do the fun stuff that inspire them, that make them want to work. So, statistically, right? And so, how do we detrack? We've seen this all before. Hayden! The idea that we are doing things and combining mixed ability groups, teaching each other, peer teaching is an incredibly effective way to move away from tracking. So, all right, and next topic, curriculum. Okay, so what we teach. So there's obviously a lot of holes in our curriculum because when we talk about textbooks, right, we know that there are standardized test companies and textbook companies that have a lot of politics involved in the making of them. So we're going to do a Kagan cooperative learning activity. Yay! Okay, so we've seen this before, mix, pair, share. I'm going to turn on some disco music. You're going to stand up, and when the music stops, you're going to find someone, give them a really good high five. I'm going to ask you one question only, I promise. And you will each have 30 seconds-ish to share. It'll be a loose timed pair share. And then we're going to praise each other, and then maybe share out something that we heard. Okay, so let me get the music on really quickly. Everybody up. You don't need your technology. Come on, get the wood frame. Okay, Kara. Okay. Oh, we need a group of three. Oh wait, Mr. Wolf. Okay, all right. Come on in, Diane, you can join a group. Okay, just right there, wonderful. You invited her in, so nice. Okay, so I want you to think of a time, I'm gonna give you think time, I promise, where a textbook that you were using or curriculum that you were given was just missing something. It was either missing a perspective, you know, for instance, right now, I'm teaching about Islam, and my textbook does a very good job at talking about all the empires, but maybe not a really good job of talking about Muslim people and really what they believe. So that's a hole that I had to add my own curriculum to. You could think of maybe, you know, like Columbus Day, or those days where you bring in history, or something that you're reading that you notice, wow, we're really missing a perspective here. So think time. Okay. The person with the longest hair. Go.
So the kids are picking in front of the bench or whatever it is, which makes it
Okay, so we've got the Prentice Hall books.
No, I'm just,
So we're
I'm just happy. Oh, yeah, in school, I didn't, I was like, well,
Yeah, the Foster has
So, I mean, I didn't know that.
That's what we're finding now.
Okay, switch.
I find every year there's not a lot of which I haven't filled, that there's ancient empire. Here's our kids, it's heritage, Mexican heritage, and they don't know anything. I went to the exhibit. So when was good? I went to the exhibit, and they asked me to teach it. Yeah, I know. But you captured it into your class? Oh, I could if I that's my only question. I can't finish anyway, so, but I feel like it's every
If you are a group of three, move on to a third person.
for me, I just need
Okay, I know we have a lot to talk about on this. This is not a small thing. So is there anyone that heard something from their partner that they thought was valuable to share? Oh, we'll sparkle in a second, don't worry. Yes.
I heard from Miv that the science program for the grade she's teaching may need some more math from a supplemental standpoint. So Miv is looking at maybe meshing two programs together to really add more substance to the program.
Screams collaboration. Okay, wonderful. Anybody else have a, maybe related to cultures that maybe have been left out? Yes.
She just shared that in the curriculum that there's nothing on Mexican Americans or just Mexicans like the OMEX. And so there's a gap that she hopes to fulfill because we live in California and this is like the core of so much of that history. And so she went to LACMA and found very little. So I think maybe that's a goal where she's gonna, try to go out and research about this so she can present it to the children, especially because we do have children of such diversity and there is a lot of Latinos, Mexicans in this, as even more so like in kindergarten now this year too. And it would be nice for them to kind of know a little bit of background before getting to high school.
One example from the book was actually about, American discovery, right? And thinking about Columbus and using that word discover and the problem with that word. Because they didn't discover anything that was already discovered long ago, more that they found it again. So even just the words that are used in our curriculum sometimes send a message that those people were less important. And so it's a huge implication for us as educators that we have to supplement. Okay, take your seat. Oh, Sparkle, your teammate. That's the kid's favorite. So, thank you all for doing occasion structure. And as I said before, that curriculum is obviously political. There's so much involved. We've heard about in Texas, a lot of us, about the fight to take out evolution and things like that, and just out of the textbooks and what that could mean for a state. California and Texas are the two biggest state curriculums that push national textbooks. So we're the biggest, we have the biggest say, if you will. So these are the questions that we really have to ask when we are assessing curriculum. Children who are not in the dominant group, this is a quote from the author, may have a hard time finding themselves or their communities in the curriculum. For instance, American Indian children may read about themselves as savages, bereft of culture until the Europeans arrived, like the discovery topic. African Americans often read sanitized versions of slavery. Mexican Americans read of westward expansion with no information about the fact that their ancestors were already living in the lands these Europeans conquered. And working class children learn almost nothing about their history. And that's also a shame for the more affluent students who think it doesn't exist. And females may be left wondering, how is half of humanity constantly being left out of the curriculum? Yes, we are. Some strategies. Obviously, supplementing the textbook. And we all know this. That is not new. We can't trust the textbook for everything. Teach topics through the lens of the students. For instance, using families' immigrant experience to reference cultural diffusion when you're learning about, displacement of people during conquest. That you can make those connections very easily. Even with the news recently about the Mediterranean and those people being forced to go back. They came through Libya. I don't know if you guys heard about that, but this is happening everywhere, not just in America, and so it's really real and relevant. Okay, so this was really interesting. So a lot of times we're uncomfortable about talking about these things, right? Talking about race issues or slavery or Islam in the world. These are topics that rev people up, rev kids up. And the author said to use patriotism, meaning like we are fighting for freedom and collective freedoms by, that is what patriotism is. That's what Americans are. That's what we do. So we need to fight for those people's freedoms as well. Interesting approach. Might not work for everybody, but important. Any questions on that? Kind of a big topic, and it doesn't fully answer that question. In the end, it is uncomfortable but important. Okay, so what do students want from their teachers? So I'm not going to do an activity for this, but I will say students, so according to a 3-year very intense study, this is what the most important things that kids want from their teachers. teach about relevant topics, can everybody see? Have high expectations, use projects and experiments. They actually were not as interested as maybe we previously thought in their teacher is nice, or they have a good sense of humor. While that's great and all, they want to be challenged and they want to do fun things. So, you know, that's what people think. Oh, well, their teacher's nice. That's how a kid can articulate a teacher they like, but in reality, they want more. So, this is that phrase they use, culturally compatible. So, I'm going to give you some examples, and I tried to do a little research on the cultures that we have at Mayfield, and how we can help them. So, we'll go ahead here. Latino students are actually more connected by getting to know the family and what is going on with the family. So as a teacher, connecting to Latino students is through the family and knowing what's going on in their community and their family. Also through music, there's the research has been shown that being able to relate on a more common level than teacher-student, but you know, through music or movies, and that they are used to a strict household, and so hold them accountable but be loving. For Korean students, they are taught at home that if they don't understand something, it is the fault of their teachers. So they don't want to embarrass their teacher. So they might not ask questions. So interesting to note. And grades are shared across the family, and so they reflect their life, right? So grades are really, really important. In Chinese students, Confucian thought is connected, that they must excel, and also that embarrassment part is key. Very quiet, because volunteering information is not good, unlike American education that seeks participation. So when they aren't raising their hand, it's not that they aren't connecting. When teaching Chinese American students, they're used to imitation and visual aids, so using a lot of models. And they want to see what you want from them. So that anxiety of, okay, just tell me what you want, and I will do that. They aren't very good at create, necessarily. I want to make that. Meaning that challenges them more. If that makes sense. Yes, I apologize. And it may cause embarrassment at praise. They may not like praise publicly. In Hawaiian culture, children respond to group praise much better than individual praise. That's interesting. And there's a lot of research on praise and the type of praise, whether it's personal praise. A Japanese person will praise you based on the work you do, or the things that you say, but not necessarily about, they don't like personal physical attribute compliments and praises. So, and these obviously are based on just cultural differences. That's not everybody, but that's something that we can be aware of, that even when we praise, it may not be helping us the way we think it is. So, interesting. So, I leave you with, the best teachers do things that we already do. Well-executed cooperative learning, project-based learning, problem-based learning that's relevant, student-driven, and using students' background is key to being successful in a multicultural classroom, which is the same thing as reaching all learners. So this stuff that we all keep learning about and seeing, it helps everybody, and it's beneficial and should be used in all our classrooms. So, hey, we're doing great. We're already doing this stuff. So thank you guys so much. That's the end of my presentation.